Okay, welcome everybody to another episode of Drunk Agile. With us in the background there, hiding this time, she's hiding, is the star of the show, Nisha.
Yeah, she's
Right.
she does think that she can play hide and seek, but no.
She can't.
Yeah.
Then, of course, we have the Yogi Bear of Agile, who is
Prateek Singh.
and my name is Daniel Vacanti. Thank you again for joining us. Prateek, what are you drinking tonight?
So today I made an old fashioned. Been a while since I had an old fashioned, so which is never a good thing.
That's never a good thing.
There's too many days between an old fashioned. I used a small batch, 4 roses, particularly inoffensive in an old fashioned. That's 45% alcohol. That's straight bourbon.
Yep. So I went back to my Auchentoshan. For fans of the show, you know that Auchentoshan is my favorite. This one, however, is fairly disappointing. 25-year-old, 44.8%. But you can see I'm working my way through it. Just want to get through this.
It's a slog.
Yeah. So we can go on to other stuff. But normally, don't get me wrong. Normally, I love my Auchentoshans. So.
Yeah. Well,
cheers. Yeah, cheers, everybody. Cheers. Hope you're enjoying your favorite drink as well now. Oh, I didn't sip.
You don't like it so much that you didn't sip.
I totally forgot. I'm like, oh yeah, so I gotta drink it. Prateek, can you introduce our topic for tonight, please?
So today we're answering a question from Mark Parks. I think we addressed a part of his question before, but this second part, which I think is really interesting, is and I'll read the question verbatim, which is how best to use flow-based data to help guide meetings such as Scrum events. So what he's asking really is things like retrospective, sprint reviews, your sprint planning, the daily Scrum. How can we bring these flow-based metrics in there?
Yeah, great. So great question. It's one we get quite a bit, especially for those of you who are familiar with Scrum. And I'm sure if you are doing Scrum, that you are dutifully doing all of those events. And one more, but I'll leave it to the reader to figure out what that other event is that Prateek did not mention, that really doesn't have any metrics associated with it per se. Okay, so Mark, the first thing I think we can say to short circuit some of this conversation anyway is one of our very first episodes. I want to think, was it our second or third one? I want to say
it was definitely the first one with a guest.
So we had Colleen Johnson on. Colleen Johnson's the CEO of Scatterspoke, which is a retrospective tool. She's also the CEO of ProKanban.org. But on that show, we talked a lot about what metrics are useful in retrospectives. So Colleen had some great insight into that. So without wasting too much time here, if you're interested in metrics for retrospectives, please go check out that video with Colleen. And like I said, there's just a wealth of information on that one. So then the next one that we can probably cross off the list pretty quickly is the sprint review. I know, Prateek, do you want to talk a little bit about the sprint review and what?
Yeah, sure. So typically in a sprint review, you would show the product and show what you did and figure out how you can get feedback on that to see if you're moving in the right direction. And you could do a couple of things in sprint review with these flow metrics as well. You can essentially show the flow metrics to show how well the team is operating and what is the plan to improve that. You can also, with the feedback that you got in the sprint review from your stakeholders, reforecast and say, okay, based on what you're telling us, it looks like we're going to be shifting our plans this way, and now you'll get this functionality on this particular date. You can use throughput to run Monte Carlo, and as I said earlier, you can show your stakeholders, hey, this is the rate at which we get things out to you to get feedback. This is how that's changing. So.
Yeah. So before too many Scrum trainers out there are groaning, yes, we know that the sprint review is it's not a demo. We know it's meant to be more of a collaboration with our stakeholders to understand, hey, based on the information we gained from getting a done increment, based on the information that we gained from meeting our sprint goal, based on the information that we have gained about the market, in the last sprint, how might we adjust our approach to tweaking our product. And so, as Prateek said, all of those come into play. I mean, maybe because of this dynamic increment, it might require a different release date for whatever reason, and so we can do some forecasting on what that might look like. For example, so there's that. I don't know. I guess I don't know that there's really too much more to say about that than
I just wanted to pull the thread of collaboration just a little bit more to say, you can essentially show them something like your cycle time and say that this is the rate at which we're able to actively collaborate on individual items with you right now, and this is the direction it's trending in. So expect to see things more often or whatever. You could have that question of how this is how our collaboration with you is going based on our flow metrics.
Absolutely, yeah, very good. I mean, and so we should come up with little bingo cards, or our own drinking game. So when we say certain things, we have to take a drink, because I'm gonna say, based on that collaboration point that you just made, something that we always say when we talk about metrics. Metrics are all about getting you to ask the right questions sooner. Right? Mm-hmm. It's how can we use these metrics to gain some insight, so that we can ask better questions, and hopefully by asking better questions make better decisions based on that data that we've got. So I don't know, take a drink. If we say ask questions sooner, take a drink. But that's really what it's about. It's about fostering that collaboration.
This might result in very drunk agile.
Yeah, very, 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 very drunk agile. So if anybody wants to suggest some bingo cards or something that or drinking game for things that we say all the time, that would be great. We'd love to see it. All right, next event that we can hopefully cross off our list fairly quickly is sprint planning. Would you like to talk a little bit about sprint planning as well?
Yeah, I think we spent I think about 4 episodes talking about probabilistic thinking in Monte Carlo, and I hate to keep referring people back to those, but do take a look at those. Talk about where we talk about how you can use something like a Monte Carlo simulation to figure out how many things can you get done over a period of time. And one of the things that you want to figure out in sprint planning is how much work can you get done, and that will help you craft your sprint goal. And that is our recommended way of doing that is using Monte Carlo simulations to figure out over the course of the sprint, what do we expect? How many work items do we expect to get done? And then what outcome can those work items achieve as a sprint goal?
Yeah, I don't know. This is kind of quickly turning into kind of a lecture on Scrum, but a lot of people think that sprint planning is all about deciding what work needs to get done, and that's actually not quite true. It's a little bit true, but it's not. It's really not quite true. The purpose of sprint planning is to coming out of that event, coming out of that meeting, is to, number one, have a sprint goal, and then number two, have a plan to achieve that goal. Mm-hmm. Part of that plan could be, as Prateek was saying, what things do we think that we're going to work on? Although the Scrum Guide doesn't say that you have to know up front everything that you are going to work on. That's really kind of not the point. And I would argue it's kind of anti-agile to say we know exactly what we're going to work on right up front. But to Prateek's point, from a product owner's perspective, it'd be very, very useful to know kind of what is my budget for this sprint. Mm-hmm. I mean, how many PBIs can I reasonably expect to get in the sprint? Because that might help with my ordering. That might help with trying to decide which ones I think are the right ones to be working on now, versus not. And that to me, that's really where something like Monte Carlo forecasting comes into its own. Because we have to emphasize this. Remember, we talked about with Monte Carlo forecasting, it doesn't tell you what items are going to get done, but it will give you an idea of how many items will get done. So it's about fostering that conversation with the product owner. This is roughly your budget. And by the way, you can run that Monte Carlo simulation. I think we showed this. You can run that Monte Carlo simulation for sprint planning. I think I did it once in less than 30 seconds, literally less than 30 seconds. It's like, okay, product owner, here's your budget. Now let's get on to the more interesting conversation of what's our sprint goal and what's our plan to achieve that goal.
Can we actually achieve? Do we have a realistic enough sprint goal based on the forecasting we're doing?
Exactly. So sprint planning. I mean, so Essentially, we're talking about throughput, Monte Carlo simulation for sprint planning. There's really not much more to it in terms of the metrics for sprint planning. Which we were, as everyone's probably realized, we're saving the best for last. We purposefully saved the best for last. What is that? The last event that we want to talk about?
Yeah,
And what metric can we use, Prateek?
the last event that we want to talk about is the daily Scrum or the daily stand-up, where the team's coming together to talk about how are things going, what can we do to get things done today, what's the plan for the day, and the metric that we love to use for it. And if you've watched earlier episodes, you would probably have seen us refer to it multiple times, is the aging work in progress. What's the work item age? What is the work item age of our of everything that's in the workflow right now? What is the
Yep.
work item age of the items that we are working right now? That's what I was going to say initially.
Thank you, Yogi Berra.
I was going to say that, and then I flipped it right at the end to say the items in your workflow.
100% of this game is 80% mental. Yeah, thanks, Prateek. Thank you for that insight. But this is, to me, the reason I think we want to spend a little bit of time on this is because from a Scrum perspective, and I know I'm probably going to get a whole bunch of hate mail for this, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Your hate mail is going to go up by 1%.
Yeah, exactly. That's just in the noise factor right now. Scrum as a framework does a great job at talking about what you're supposed to do at the beginning of the sprint and what you're supposed to do at the end of the sprint. But it really doesn't give all that much guidance in terms of what to do during the sprint. And for my money, that's really where the rubber meets the road. I mean, that's the bulk of where you're going to be spending your time is actively managing how you're working within the sprint. And the Scrum Guide is largely silent on how to do that. And this is where the flow metrics, this is why I love the professional Scrum with Kanban class, shameless plug. This is where flow metrics, especially aging, come into their own, because it's tailor-made for helping teams to understand how the sprint is progressing, where those problems are, and what actions they need to take. So maybe I think we should talk about some of that. How do we actually leverage something like work item age to inform actions, to inform decisions, to inform change of plans?
Yeah, and if you haven't watched the earlier episodes, let's kind of define these things as we're talking about them. Work item age is essentially how long has something been in your process, something that started but not finished yet. How long has it been in your process? One of the things you can do is compare how long something has been in your process to how long have things taken in the past. If this particular item has been in your process, let's say for 6 days already, and if you look back and look at your cycle time and it says 85% of the time we get things done in 5 days or less, let's say that's what it says, then you would say this thing has been in here for 6 days. This has already taken longer than 85% of our work has in the past. We should be doing something about this. Let's take some action on this. Let's try to fix this thing or split it, whatever we need to do with it. Let's take some action on it. So it's a call to action essentially on items that are active in your workflow right now.
And that's a great example, because you're saying, hey, this item is 6 days old, but 85% of the time we were finished in 5 days or less. Well, by looking at age, if you were monitoring age every single day of the sprint, you'd probably get that signal much earlier than when it got to 6 days. You'd probably get that signal after most likely 2 days, 2 or 3 days. At which case we could, during our daily Scrum or our daily stand-up, which, by the way, maybe we should talk about the purpose of the daily Scrum and the daily stand-up. But that's where where our team can take that signal and again adjust their plan based on this information we're getting. So what are some things that they can do? So let's say that an item is 2 or 3 days old, and we're already getting the signal that this thing's not looking so good. What are some things that we can do, Prateek?
Yeah, that's where the team. This is when why I think you'll agree with us. 90% of process management happens at the daily stand-up. The rest of it is sprinkled all over. 90% of it happens at the daily stand-up. And this is where we pull out all those process management tools that we know of, which is in the Agile world at least, which is swarming on items, which is right-sizing items, and and kind of breaking things up, figuring out is there parts of this item that are kind of already done, and we've just latched on too much of it. Can we break it apart and move forward? Is there something external holding this thing up? Do we need to go raise it up in the organization to get it moved on? So all those things, swarming, splitting this thing further, um, figuring out if it's held up by an external dependency, and figuring out what we can do about it. Or uh, the the last one I would mention, which would be, have we just pulled too much work in and we're not focused on getting things done? It's an immediate feedback loop to go, things are taking longer because we're pulling too much work in and not able to focus on getting things done. We're starting and not finishing.
Right.
So,
Let's talk a little bit more about the slicing / right sizing piece, because again, fans of the show know that that's kind of a hot button topic for us.
take a drink.
Take a drink. Yeah. When you get that signal from monitoring work item age that something is taking too long to complete, absent any other information, for example, this thing's blocked on an external dependency. Absent that information, I can say with pretty high confidence that the majority of the time, the reason this thing's taking too long is because it's too blank big. Right? It's just too big. And so many teams get into this rut that, especially coming out of sprint planning, there's like, okay, we've got our PBIs and we've decided what PBIs we're working on, that, hey, that's the PBI and that's what it has to be. And we're just going to work on that PBI. I don't care what it is. We maybe, God forbid, pointed it. Don't get us started. And it's like, that's just what it is. And that's just so not true. When you get that signal, when that an item is aging too long, or it's getting too old, absolutely have the conversation about, can we break this thing up? Just as Prateek said, based on the information that we've gained about it, maybe we've completed some stuff, and this stuff that we've completed is already valuable, and we can break that off and call that good. Maybe we figured out a different way to, to organize the acceptance criteria, such that maybe some of these acceptance criteria make sense just kind of on their own. Whatever it is, but by all means, feel free. Not only do you have the ability, I would argue you have the responsibility to break those items up when you get that signal.
Yeah, it just reminds me of two things. One is the general agile mindset of maximizing the amount of work not done, to kind of find out what is non-essential and move it away from the essential so that you work on the highest priority things. When you split items, when you're actively breaking things apart, it becomes easier and easier to prioritize the essential ahead of the non-essential. And at the same time, the second thing it reminds me of is actually the perfect example of this. I remember a team working on a story, and they usually got things done in 8-9 days or less. And this one story took 13-14 days, and they didn't break it up while it was in flight. They should have. But later on, we looked at it in a retrospective. And again, if you go back to the episode with Colleen, you'll see how you can use a scatter plot to look at these things in retrospective and talk about them. And it had 3 acceptance criteria. There were 3 labels that needed to be changed. That's what it was. I mean, on the face of it, changing 3 labels, there is no way you're splitting that up. There's just 3. I'm typing the stuff up. Within an hour, I'm checking it in. Someone gets a build, verifies it's done. It turns out the 3rd label was supposed to follow some new UX standards, where part of it had to be bold and the rest of it didn't, and there was some interesting funky thing that needed to happen with it. And that story, the first 2 labels were done within an hour, but the last one took them 13 days to get done. Meanwhile, it was all sitting there uncommitted, not moving into production. So that's the reason we're talking about it. You can deliver value with a smaller item. Do it.
So as usual, I was not listening to a word that you said. I was actually going to look at the videos that we've already published, because I was wondering if we have a video specifically on story slicing strategies.
We have right sizing.
And we don't, and we have a right sizing video. So that, I guess that's another video that we want to point you to for this. A lot of this is overlap for the stuff that we talk about in the right sizing video. So please check that out. But I don't know, maybe this will require us, even though we're talking a lot about it now, a specific story. Like,
Yeah.
what are some clues that you have that you can slice your stories? But specifically for this video, the very first clue that you will have is monitoring aging. Right? If the item is getting too old, then you've got a pretty good idea that that something's wrong, and most likely it's too big. And I just want to reemphasize what Prateek said before, is that okay, you get that signal. Just because you get the signal, that's not enough. You have to take action. And if you take action, in your stand-ups, in your daily scrums, that's where all the hard work is. You get that right, then all these other things that we were talking about in the retrospective, in the review, in the planning or whatever, all of those things honestly will take care of themselves. If you get every day you are being diligent and vigilant, both of those things. Are those synonyms? I don't know. We'll have to look that up. If you're diligent and vigilant, about aging, everything else takes care of itself.
Yeah. That's kind of been the thread on this in this video. We have gone back and talked about a lot of things that we've already covered in earlier videos, but especially for a Scrum team, how to take those same things and how to use those flow metrics day to day in your Scrum ceremonies to figure out how to make your flow better, to make the process smoother. That's literally what we've been talking about here. You will probably go back and watch multiple of those videos to get deeper into the things we've talked about. But there is an app. These two, the flow principles from Kanban and Scrum, are not exclusive at all. They can help each other quite a bit.
So I think it's time for a shameless plug here. If all of you will forgive the shameless plug, if you want to learn more about specifically how to use flow metrics in Scrum events, please check out scrum.org's Professional Scrum with Kanban class, because there is a large percentage of the class is exactly that, going through the Scrum events and understanding how we can use some of these flow principles, and especially these flow metrics, to get more out of those events. But I would also argue, go take a look at prokanban.org's Applying Professional Kanban class, because a lot of that class as well is independent of your context. The Applying Professional Kanban is all about just independent of your specific context. How can you use these general flow principles to get more effective, to get more efficient, to get more predictable, all of those things, whether you do all the Scrum events, or not. So forgive the shameless plug, but if you really want to learn more, those classes are really, really designed about how to leverage metrics for improvement. I don't know. What else do we have to say, or is that,
No, that's mostly it. I think we covered all the events except for number 5 that you hinted at. And
yeah, but yeah, remember, maybe leave a comment if you want to leave a comment in this video. What is that mysterious 5th event that we are not talking about, that doesn't necessarily have any metrics associated per se? All you Scrum experts out there, I'm expecting you to get that question right. So please leave us a comment on that. And as always, please leave us comments or questions that you might have about anything in this episode. Thank you to Mark for coming up with this. We're always looking for that content, and glad that we could hopefully shed some light on, or maybe confuse you further. Maybe we've confused you further about how to use these flow metrics.
Yeah, well, I just want to carry on thanking Mark on that, because we talk about all this stuff pretty often, but we don't put it in the right context for a lot of folks. Scrum is definitely the dominant framework for Agile teams, and what we wanted to do here by answering this question also was show you that it's not exclusive. Kanban and Scrum are not exclusive, and you can actually make your Scrum practice a lot stronger by putting in these Kanban principles and these flow metrics.
So I like to give Prateek the last word. I think that's the last word on this topic. Thanks again to Mark. Thanks again to everybody who has sent in your questions. We are working through them. We've already got a few queued up for the next set of episodes. So look for your question and just please keep them coming. So for Nisha, laying there in the background, just bored out of her mind.
She's just passed out.
For the Yogi Bear of Agile, Prateek Singh, my name is Daniel Bacanti. Thank you again for joining us for this episode of Drunk Agile, and we will see you in the next video. Good night, everybody.
Yeah.